you might say, well, this sounds like a lot of work. And of course, it is work. However, it's about qualifying policy and getting inspiration. And often it's about a common understanding of what the problem really is you're addressing. And I would say that if you take, the task for managers is really to orchestrate the process in a way where you don't involve everyone all the time, but you do it in ways that are meaningful and sensible. And I think the key point I want to make, of course, is that citizens or businesses need to be at the heart of that, but others can contribute too. Next slide, please. So this about the new mode of knowledge is, I often call it professional empathy, which is about the systematic ability for a public organization, or really any organization, to experience what citizens experience, just like the private sector gourmet chef Rasmus Boysen did at Hvidovre Hospital, jumping into the hospital bed and experiencing for himself what was going on and what it felt like to receive that food service. Next, please. I won't delve very much into this, but just to say that, of course, there are many ways of involving citizens. And I think the key point here is that we can involve citizens both to understand the present or the past through quantitative surveys or through more qualitative research. We can also engage with citizens to craft a new future. And we need to do both in order to anchor our innovation efforts in citizens' experience and in reality. What we focus on at MindLab, and which I'll concentrate on today, is the left side of that figure. What I'll concentrate on now will be on the bottom left, which is about qualitative ways of understanding citizens' experiences. And then when we come to the more design-oriented piece of co-creation, I'll look into the top left of the figure, into how do we then collaborate, and what are design-driven ways of running workshops with citizens, for example. But just to say that there's a spectrum of types of engagement, and unfortunately, we in the public service, certainly in Denmark, but also in many other countries, have spent most of our time on quantitative metrics and quantitative surveys, and they won't tell us anything about what to change. They'll tell us something about how big the problem is, but they won't tell us very specifically what needs to be changed. So we need to move to the left of this figure, certainly, and we need to get much deeper and more qualitative in order to drive innovation, I believe. Next slide, please. So a few examples of what I mean by getting up close and qualitative with citizens. This is one of our colleagues at MindLab with a video camera doing field work, ethnographic field work with businesses. This is a Danish farmer, and we're doing this to explore what it feels like to be at the receiving end of government bureaucracy and red tape as part of the Danish efforts to reduce administrative burdens for business. And in Denmark, we've now come quite far in understanding administrative burdens, not just as something that takes time or costs money for a business, but certainly also something that has to be experienced as sensible and meaningful to business. In fact, often that's what matters the most. So what we do when we do these types of interviewing, we try to understand what are the triggers that irritate or annoy or are meaningless to business, and we try to understand how the you. So just want to check up on that before I proceed. Can you tell me if you can see me? Okay, you can see me. Fine. All right, I'll just continue then. I have a not so good picture. I have a picture back again. Here we go. So next slide, please. Next, yeah. So another example would be when we at MindLab interviewed citizens who had a serious work injury in their own homes about what it felt like to be receiving the service package from the Danish Industrial Board of Work Injuries. And what we experienced when we did these interviews with just a few citizens, qualitative, in-depth, in their own homes, where they could show us all the files and all the processing and the insurance papers and all of this, all of the work that goes into settling a work injury case. What we found was really the insight that the whole way the system works makes people more sick than they are already. And this kind of insight was quite fundamental to that agency, which has taken it very seriously and is now working in many different ways to find ways of making it a more meaningful and positive experience to be handling a work injury case as a citizen. Because certainly our good colleagues there don't go to work every day trying to make people more sick. In fact, they hope they're doing a good job, and our research just exposed that they have a potential to really improve on that. Next slide, please. Another example, interviewing this young man, Dennis, who's 23 years old. He's an apprentice, just got his first job. And the reason we interviewed him was to explore what it takes to get young citizens like him to use online digital tax services. The Danish tax ministry can see in its statistics that the group in Denmark, the age group that is least likely to use online digital tax services are young people under 30. And they could see the figures and the statistics, but didn't understand why, with the most digital generation ever in Denmark, why are they not using the services? And when we interviewed and sound recorded our interview with Dennis here, we discovered that of course he can use a computer, he has one, he uses it, he even has broadband, but he doesn't get the tax language, he doesn't understand the logic of the site, he doesn't know what to do when he gets a higher salary from his employer and how to what to change in the system. So what he does actually is to take his car and drive 23 kilometers down to the local municipal office and get his tax stuff done by the nice lady down there. That's obviously a very costly thing and is totally against the digitization efforts of the Danish ministry. So we tried to explore what it would take to get Dennis here to actually be able to complete a transaction online. And with that insight about how he uses computer and how he can't do it, they're now running a major process in the tax ministry to try to find new ways of redesigning the whole interface and interaction with young people or with any citizen and the tax system. Next, please. Finally, just a final example where we helped 5 different Danish ministries understand what it feels like to be an immigrant worker, a highly qualified immigrant worker, like an engineer in this case, an Indian engineer, Sadaf, who's arriving in Denmark and trying to get a life and a family and a job running in our country. And we basically interviewed 8 or 10 different individuals to help share the experience they have when they arrive in Denmark and also with Danish public services, just to get a common understanding across a number of agencies and ministries of what might need to be improved. Next slide, please. So what you might be asking yourself is that if we're just asking people and citizens what they want, they'll want more from us. And also going so qualitative that, as I mentioned here, just interviewing 6, 8, 10 different people, it's not representative. And of course it isn't. But there's value from going much deeper and being very, very concrete about experience. And it turns out that if you interview 8 or 10 people, even less, around a certain service experience, you find similar patterns very, very quickly. And even though you differentiate on gender and age, on geography and so on, you often find surprisingly coherent patterns of experience. And they can then drive policy design and service design. And so I'd argue that we do need to get much, much deeper, and that it is not about being statistically representative, but it's about harvesting insights that can then drive ideation and creation, which is the last third bit of what I call co-creation. So next slide, please. So different kind of process. I call it, and this is coined by, amongst others, the Danish Design School in Copenhagen, rehearsing the future. It is about using a design-inspired process to drive the creation of policy and service. What I've talked about so far has been about involvement and expertise and knowledge and inspiration and about understanding the qualitative experience. But what about the creation and the creative process? Next slide, please. So 2 dimensions of design as a practice and as a discipline. Yes, when you think of design, you probably think about styling of cars or graphic design or designing various types of gadgets or mobile phones. But design is really broader than that. It's about creating desirable futures. So designing is the practice and the discipline of creating a new future. And that can also be services, and it can certainly be systems and strategies. It can be organizations. To do that, it requires an attitude and a way of seeing the world which is not only analytical, which we're very good at in government, but is also looking at synthesis, looking more holistically at solutions, looking at what works for people. And in this slide, you see a couple of the key traits or components of the 2 opposing styles of thinking and acting on analysis and synthesis. And my argument would be that we need much more synthesis and putting together and crafting coherent, meaningful services using some of those approaches that you see on the right-hand side, particularly using some of the keywords of prototyping, thinking through doing and getting practical and concrete about things. which drives me to the next point, which is about design, not just as an attitude or an approach to the world, and a way of thinking also as a manager, but design as action. Next slide, please. So design as action is about challenging problems and assumptions, something we rarely do well enough as public servants. We often take for granted the overall policy framework or the suggestions we get from politicians or parliament. And of course we should be loyal servants, but being the loyal servant is also about questioning for underlying assumptions and about sometimes even helping reframe what the true problem is. And as I mentioned, I showed through some of the citizen research cases, by getting very close to citizens, you can sometimes reframe what the fundamental problem is. For instance, in the case of the injured workers, the fundamental problem was not how do we run an efficient case management process. The real problem was we're making this process meaningless to people, and we're making them sicker than they are already, and we're not helping them back to the labor market, and we're not helping them back in their lives again. Another point is this, which goes again around this theme, is the human dimension. Designers, best of them, are certainly concerned with how humans, how people, whether they're customers or types of users or whoever they are, actually engage with solutions, with services, with products, with artifacts, with systems. And we have to, when we design policy, when we design service, we need to have that human dimension. We have to understand what drives behavior, what behavior is there even, what drives motivation, and ultimately what drives outcomes. And that's really, in many ways, also a design discipline. Experimental, using prototyping. I'll give you some examples in the last bit here. Prototyping, testing out solutions, not as pilots, but as very early first drafts that are even built to fail. So you prototype to fail consciously, to learn rapidly, and then iteratively try something different, and then move forward. However, it's a process that requires public servants to let go and be willing to create stuff that are rough drafts and let citizens say, this is not working for me. This is not going to work in my context, in my situation. And of course, that is a bit of a tough challenge sometimes, even though we're not even in the pilot phase. We're not even hurting anyone. We're just trying stuff out. But that's what we need to do if we want to get them right. Finally, being concrete. Using visual tools to enable conversation, both using visual tools to enable conversations with citizens, but also using visual tools, even the tools or the visuals that the artist Olaf Eliasson that I mentioned showed to the public servants to drive common understanding of what the challenges are. It can be visualizing data, it can be visualizing experience. I'll give you some examples in a moment. Next slide, please. So of course innovation is about the post-its, and I have to show some just so you know that we do use post-its at MindLab also, and we need to get ideas up there, and we need to brainstorm. But let's move forward to the next slide. It's very much about testing those ideas and engaging citizens. Like in this case, it's high school students in Denmark. We're engaging in a conversation about their understanding of personal finances, understanding of tax issues, understanding of money matters. And so we're at the school with them, and one of our colleagues is trying out ideas with them and engaging in a dialogue with them. Next slide, please. So here is an example where we use a visual tool to help citizens prioritize what is most important to them, get all the ideas that we've generated with them into a structure and into a type of prioritization. So that target you're seeing there is really a tool to do that. And it's about using visual tools and design tools, even using graphic design in a design process to help being more concrete and specific and tangible about what is needed. Next, please. It can also be about role-playing. So in this case, we've worked with several agencies to actually do small-scale role-playing with stick figures and video filming them in policy and service design.